The late afternoon sun stretched across the wide Wyoming prairie, painting the dry land in soft shades of gold. A warm breeze drifted through the tall grass, carrying the smell of pine trees and fresh earth from the distant hills. Along the lonely trail, a worn wagon rolled slowly toward a ranch that looked as though it had been forgotten by time itself. Holding the reins was a man named Ethan Walker. His face carried the quiet look of someone who had smiled very little in recent years. Beside him sat his 7-year-old son, Noah, hugging an old wooden toy horse against his chest. It was the last toy his mother had carved before sickness stole her away nearly 2 years earlier. Since that day, Ethan had lived only for one purpose: to keep his son safe. Every town they visited became another place they left behind. Every job ended with another dusty road. He was not chasing fortune anymore. He only wanted to find one place where his son could finally feel at home again. As the wagon climbed a small hill, the ranch came into full view. The house still stood proudly beneath a line of cottonwood trees, but everything around it showed the weight of hard years. The front fence had collapsed in several places. The barn roof leaned slightly to one side, where old boards had given way. Empty fields stretched across the property where healthy crops had once grown. Near the broken fence stood a woman trying to lift a heavy wooden post back into place by herself. Her name was Hannah Brooks. She wore a faded green dress with sleeves rolled above her elbows, and loose strands of chestnut hair escaped the braid resting over her shoulder. Dirt covered her hands, yet she kept working without complaint. Since losing her husband, Samuel Brooks, during a flash flood that swept through the valley, Hannah had carried every burden of the ranch alone. The land had grown harder to manage each passing season, but she refused to abandon the home her family had built with their own hands. Ethan slowed the wagon beside the broken fence and climbed down. He removed his hat with quiet respect before speaking. "Ma'am, I heard someone around these parts could use a man who knows how to repair a ranch." Hannah looked up, surprised by the stranger's calm voice. She had seen men arrive before, offering help only to ask for something in return. Some wanted money she no longer had, others wanted pieces of her land. But this man looked different. His clothes were clean but worn from travel. His boots carried miles of dust. Most of all, his eyes carried the same sadness she saw in her own reflection every morning. She nodded toward the broken rails. "You can see the trouble before you." Ethan stepped closer and examined the fence carefully. He ran one rough hand across the cracked wood before kneeling beside one of the fallen posts. "This fence has stood a long time," he said quietly, "but another hard storm will finish what the weather already started." Hannah folded her arms, watching him. "My husband kept saying he'd replace it." Her voice softened. "He never got the chance." Ethan remained silent for several moments. He understood unfinished promises better than most people. There were countless things he still wished he had said to his own wife before illness stole her from him. Some wounds stayed open because there was never a chance to close them. Finally, he stood and brushed the dust from his hands. "I'll begin here if you'll have me." A faint smile crossed Hannah's face. "Starting with the fence seems like the right choice." While the adults spoke, Noah climbed carefully from the wagon. He stayed close to his father, holding the small wooden horse tightly. Since his mother's passing, he rarely trusted anyone new. He watched Hannah from behind Ethan's shoulder with quiet curiosity. Hannah noticed him immediately. "And who do we have here?" Noah lowered his eyes without answering. Ethan rested a gentle hand on his son's shoulder. "This is Noah." Hannah smiled warmly. "I baked fresh apple bread this morning. If you're hungry, there's plenty inside." Noah glanced at his father. Ethan nodded once. "It's all right." The little boy slowly followed Hannah toward the porch, still clutching his wooden horse. Ethan watched them disappear through the front door before turning back toward the broken fence. He opened the toolbox from the back of the wagon. Inside rested his hammer saw, measuring string, nails, and years of experience earned through honest work. He picked up the first damaged rail and began removing the broken boards one by one. The afternoon passed beneath the steady rhythm of hammer strikes echoing across the quiet ranch. Sweat rolled down Ethan's face as he dug fresh holes for stronger fence posts. Every swing of the hammer seemed to push painful memories a little farther into the distance. Hard work had always been easier than sitting alone with grief. Inside the ranch house, Noah stood quietly near the kitchen table while Hannah sliced warm apple bread. She noticed the old wooden horse tucked beneath his arm. "That's a fine little horse." Noah looked down at it. "My mom made it." Hannah's gentle smile faded into understanding. "Then it's very special." He nodded. "It's my favorite." For a long moment neither of them spoke. Hannah knew children often carried sadness differently than adults. Sometimes silence became their safest place. She placed a thick slice of bread onto a small plate and slid it toward him. "I think your mother would be glad you're taking good care of her gift." Noah looked at her for a moment before whispering the first words he had spoken to anyone besides his father in several days. "I miss her every day." Hannah felt her heart tighten. "So do I," she answered softly. The simple words built a bridge neither of them expected. Outside, Ethan had nearly completed the first section of the fence when the kitchen door opened. Noah stepped into the sunlight carrying a tin cup filled with cool water. "This is for you, Dad." Ethan smiled as he accepted it. "Thank you, son." Noah stood beside him, watching the hammer rise and fall. "Can I help?" Ethan handed him a handful of nails. "You sure can." Together they worked side by side. Ethan held the board steady while Noah carefully placed each nail where his father pointed. Then Ethan drove them into the fresh timber with strong, careful blows. The fence slowly began standing tall again. From the porch, Hannah watched the pair working together. She had expected to hire a traveling repairman for a few days. Instead, she found herself watching a father patiently teaching his son that broken things could become strong again. As evening settled across the valley, golden light washed over the repaired stretch of fence. It was only a small part of the ranch, but it looked stronger than anything around it. Hannah carried 2 plates of supper onto the porch. "You've worked enough for one day." Ethan removed his hat and wiped his forehead. "I've had harder days." She handed him a plate before sitting on the porch step. "You work like someone trying to forget something." Ethan stared toward the distant mountains glowing beneath the sunset. "Maybe I am." Hannah looked out across the fields. "I know that feeling." Silence settled comfortably between them. It was not the uncomfortable silence of strangers. It was the quiet shared by 2 people who understood loss without needing long explanations. After several minutes, Hannah spoke again. "What are you running from?" Ethan watched Noah playing quietly nearby with his little wooden horse. "A life that ended before I was ready to let it go." Hannah lowered her eyes. "I've been standing in the same place for 2 years because I couldn't let mine go either." Neither of them realized it then, but as darkness covered the Wyoming hills, something far greater than a fence had begun to change. 2 lonely hearts had met beside broken wood and worn-out dreams. And neither one yet knew that the stranger who arrived carrying only his toolbox and his son would soon become the one person who could rebuild far more than an old ranch. The next morning arrived with cool mountain air drifting across Brooks Ranch. The rising sun painted the fields with soft golden light, making the repaired section of the fence stand out proudly against everything that still needed attention. Ethan Walker was already awake before daylight. Years of traveling had taught him that honest work always began before the sun. He stepped quietly away from the wagon so he would not wake Noah, picked up his tools, and returned to the broken fence. He worked carefully, replacing weak posts with fresh cedar beams he had cut from fallen timber nearby. Every board was measured twice before being nailed into place. Ethan never believed in rushing a repair. His own father had once told him that work done with patience lasted longer than work done with pride. Those words had stayed with him through every town he had visited. Not long after sunrise, Hannah stepped onto the porch carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. She watched Ethan for several minutes before walking across the yard. "You always start this early?" she asked. Ethan smiled without stopping his work. "The day never waits." She handed him a cup. "Neither do responsibilities." Their eyes met for a brief moment. Both understood the weight behind those simple words. While Ethan continued repairing the fence, Noah wandered around the ranch with his little wooden horse. Everything seemed new to him. Chickens wandered freely across the yard. A small creek flowed behind the barn. Wildflowers grew beside the old windmill that no longer turned. It had been a long time since he had seen a place that felt peaceful. Hannah found him standing near a small vegetable garden. "Would you like to help me?" Noah looked uncertain. "What kind of help?" "I need someone brave enough to gather eggs." A tiny smile appeared on his face. "I think I can do that." Together they walked toward the chicken coop. Hannah showed him how to reach beneath the hens without frightening them. Noah laughed softly when one stubborn hen flapped her wings at him. It was only a small laugh, but Ethan heard it from across the yard. His hammer stopped in midair. For months, he had wondered whether his son would ever laugh like that again. He quietly returned to work before Noah noticed him watching. By midday, another section of the fence stood strong and straight. Ethan stretched his aching back as Hannah walked over carrying fresh sandwiches. "You've already repaired more than I expected." Ethan accepted the meal. The ranch deserves someone who doesn't give up halfway. Hannah looked toward the open fields. "Most people already have." Her words carried more meaning than she intended. Ethan noticed. "Has it really been that hard?" She sighed. After Samuel died, the cattle became fewer every year. Then a drought came. Then prices fell. Every season seemed to bring another problem. She looked across the land her husband once loved. "Sometimes I wonder if the ranch is trying harder to survive than I am." Ethan rested his sandwich on his knee. "I don't believe that." She looked at him. "Why not?" "Because broken places don't keep fighting by themselves." He nodded toward the house. "Someone has been fighting for this ranch every single day." Hannah looked away before he could see tears beginning to gather in her eyes. That afternoon, Ethan moved to the old barn. Several support beams had begun to crack beneath the heavy roof. He climbed carefully onto a ladder while Noah handed him tools from below. "You trust him with your work?" Hannah asked. "I trust him with little jobs." Noah smiled proudly. "I'm the helper." "You certainly are," Ethan replied. The little boy stood a little taller after hearing those words. As the afternoon faded, clouds gathered over the mountains. A cool wind swept across the valley. Hannah looked toward the sky. "Storm." Ethan followed her gaze. "It'll be here before dark." Together they hurried to secure loose boards around the barn. Noah carried ropes while Hannah tied down supplies stacked beside the house. They worked as one family even though none of them spoke about it. Just before the rain arrived, 3 riders appeared at the entrance of the ranch. The man leading them sat on a polished black horse. His coat was expensive. His boots looked too clean for ranch work. His name was Richard Lawson, the largest land buyer in the county. Hannah's smile disappeared the moment she recognized him. Richard removed his hat politely, though his eyes showed little kindness. "Mrs. Brooks." "Mr. Lawson." I see you've hired yourself a worker. Ethan climbed down from the barn roof. I'm only repairing what's broken. Richard looked around the ranch with quiet amusement. That might take longer than you think. Hannah folded her arms. What do you want? Richard pulled a folded document from inside his coat. I came to offer one final chance. I already answered. You answered months ago. He smiled thinly. Things change. They haven't. Richard slowly rode closer. The bank doesn't share your confidence. Ethan watched silently. Richard continued. You're behind on your loan. Harvest season won't cover the payment. Sell me the ranch now and you'll walk away with something instead of losing everything. Hannah stood firm. This land belonged to my husband. And now it belongs to debt. The words hit harder than the wind. Ethan stepped forward. I think you've said enough. Richard studied him carefully. And who might you be? A man fixing a ranch. Richard laughed quietly. You can't repair numbers with a hammer. No. Ethan looked him straight in the eyes. But you can repair hope. For a moment, Richard's smile faded. He looked back at Hannah. You have 1 month. Then he turned his horse and rode away with the other men, disappearing into the approaching storm. Rain began falling only minutes later. Inside the house, thunder rolled across the valley while Hannah sat quietly beside the fireplace. She unfolded the bank papers Richard had mentioned. The numbers were impossible to ignore. Ethan noticed her staring at them. How much? She hesitated. Enough that I don't know where the answer comes from. You should have told me. You came here looking for work. I also came here looking for honest people. She smiled sadly. Then you found one with too many problems. No. Ethan shook his head. I found someone carrying them alone. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Noah walked into the room carrying his little wooden horse. Can I show Miss Hannah something? She smiled warmly. Of course. The little boy held out the toy. My mom carved this before she got sick. Hannah examined the worn wood carefully. One of the legs had cracked almost completely through. It needs fixing. Noah nodded. I didn't know who else to ask. Hannah disappeared into another room and returned with a small box of carving tools that had belonged to Samuel. My husband loved working with wood. She carefully repaired the broken leg before polishing it smooth. When she handed the horse back, Noah hugged it tightly. It looks new. She smiled. Not new. She touched the repaired place gently. Just strong again. Ethan watched the moment from across the room. He realized she had not only repaired the toy. She had given his son another reason to smile. Later that night, long after Noah had fallen asleep, Ethan sat alone beneath the porch roof listening to the rain. He reached into the small wooden box that held every dollar he had managed to save during 2 years of hard work. It was meant for the small piece of land he hoped to buy one day, the place where Noah could finally grow up. He counted the money slowly. Then he looked toward the kitchen window. Inside, Hannah still sat alone, studying unpaid bills beneath the light of a single lantern. Ethan quietly closed the box. His eyes remained fixed on the lonely widow inside the house. For the first time since losing his wife, he found himself thinking about someone else's future as much as his own. And before the storm ended, He had already made a decision that would change every life on Brooks Ranch forever. The following morning, the valley felt fresh after the night's rain. Sunlight reflected from tiny drops resting on every fence rail Ethan had repaired. The ranch looked stronger than it had only a week earlier, but both Ethan and Hannah knew the hardest work still lay ahead. A strong fence meant little if the ranch itself could not survive. Ethan rose before anyone else. Instead of walking to the fence, he carried the small wooden box containing every dollar he had saved during 2 years of traveling. He stood outside the porch for several minutes before finally knocking. Hannah opened the door, surprised to see him standing there so early. "Everything all right?" Ethan handed her the box. "I want you to have this." She looked inside and immediately shook her head. "No. It's enough to make the bank payment. I can't take this." "You can." Hannah closed the lid and pushed it back toward him. "This is everything you have. It's everything Noah and I were saving." "Exactly." She looked directly into his eyes. "I won't let you lose your future trying to save mine." Ethan smiled gently. "You don't understand." "What?" "I stopped looking for my future the day we came here." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Hannah's eyes filled with tears. "I've spent 2 years believing I had to carry everything alone." "You don't." Before she could answer, several wagons rolled into the yard. Neighbors from nearby ranches climbed down carrying lumber, seed bags, fencing wire, and toolboxes. Hannah stared in surprise. Old Mr. Parker smiled. "Heard you had trouble." Another rancher lifted a crate onto his shoulder. "Nobody keeps a good neighbor standing alone." Soon the entire ranch became alive with people working together. Some repaired the barn roof. Others cleared fallen trees near the creek. Women prepared food inside the house while children carried water across the yard. Nobody asked for payment. They simply believed that neighbors helped neighbors. Watching everything unfold, Hannah quietly wiped away a tear. Samuel had always believed this valley was built on kindness. Now she could finally see he had been right. Over the following weeks, the ranch slowly came back to life. Fresh crops pushed through the soil after the rain. The repaired fences kept the cattle safe. The barn stood stronger than it had in years. Every morning, Noah followed Ethan from one job to the next, proudly carrying his father's toolbox. One afternoon, Hannah found the little boy sitting beneath a large oak tree drawing pictures in the dirt. "What are you making?" "Our family." She looked closer. There was Ethan. There was Noah. There was Hannah. And there was the ranch. She smiled. "You forgot someone." Noah looked confused. "Who?" "The horse." He laughed and quickly added the old wagon horse beside the barn. It was the first time Hannah had heard such a carefree laugh echo across the ranch. A few days later, the bank manager arrived unexpectedly. He climbed down from his carriage, carrying a leather folder beneath his arm. Hannah took a deep breath. "I know why you're here." The banker surprised her by smiling. "I came for your payment." She handed him the money Ethan had offered together with the money she had earned selling livestock and vegetables during the past weeks. He counted everything carefully before closing his ledger. "Mrs. Brooks." "Yes." "Your loan is paid." She stood speechless. "For now," he continued, "this ranch is yours." Relief washed over her face. As the banker prepared to leave, another rider appeared at the gate. Richard Lawson. He looked from the repaired barn to the strong fences and the busy workers crossing the yard. His confident smile slowly disappeared. This wasn't supposed to happen. Hannah stepped forward. No, it wasn't. Richard looked toward Ethan. You think you've won? Ethan answered calmly. I wasn't trying to win. I was trying to help. Richard looked around once more before turning his horse. Without another word, he rode away. Nobody watched him leave. Nobody cared. Because the ranch no longer belonged to fear. Summer arrived, bringing green fields and healthy cattle. Brooks Ranch became one of the busiest places in the valley once again. Laughter replaced silence. Every evening neighbors stopped by to share stories beneath the porch while children chased each other through the grass. One evening Ethan sat quietly repairing Noah's wooden horse again, after the little boy accidentally dropped it. Noah sat beside him, watching every movement. Dad. Yes. Are we leaving after the ranch is finished? Ethan stopped carving. He looked across the yard, where Hannah was gathering laundry from the clothesline. For the first time in years, he realized he no longer thought about the next town. He thought about tomorrow. Right here. I don't think we're leaving. Noah's face lit up. Really? I think we finally found home. The little boy threw his arms around his father. I hoped you'd say that. Later that evening, Ethan walked onto the porch, where Hannah sat watching the sunset paint the Wyoming hills. She smiled as he sat beside her. When you first arrived, she said softly, I thought you came here to repair my fence. I thought so too. She laughed quietly. But somehow you repaired much more. Ethan looked toward the fields. You helped me too. How? You reminded me that loving again doesn't mean forgetting the person we lost. Hannah reached for his hand. And you reminded me that asking someone to stay isn't a sign of weakness. She looked into his eyes. It's a sign that they've already become part of your home. Months passed. When autumn colored the valley with shades of gold and red, neighbors once again gathered at Brooks Ranch. This time there were lanterns hanging from every fence post. Music floated through the evening air. Long wooden tables stood beneath the cottonwood trees. Everyone had come for one reason. A wedding. Hannah wore a simple cream dress with wildflowers woven into her hair. Ethan wore the best coat he owned. Noah stood proudly beside them, holding the same little wooden horse his mother had carved years before. The local pastor smiled warmly as Ethan and Hannah promised to walk through every season together. When the ceremony ended, Noah slipped his small hand into Hannah's. Can I call you Mom someday? Tears filled her eyes. She knelt beside him and gently brushed his hair back. You can call me that whenever your heart is ready. Without another word, Noah wrapped his arms around her. The neighbors quietly wiped away tears as they watched. Years later, travelers passing through the valley often asked about the beautiful ranch, surrounded by strong wooden fences. The old neighbors would simply smile. They would tell the story of the lonely single father who arrived carrying nothing but a toolbox, a wagon, and a broken heart. They would tell of the widow who believed her life had ended with her husband's passing. They would point toward the sturdy fence standing proudly beside the road and say that it was where everything began. Because sometimes the greatest repairs are never made with wood, nails, or hammers. Sometimes they are built with patience, kindness, and the courage to stay when everyone else has walked away. The ranch was saved. The lonely hearts found peace. The little boy found the family he had been missing. and the stranger who came to repair a broken ranch was given the one thing he never expected to find again. A forever home